In this episode of Quakers Today, we ask, what are queer Quaker responses to climate change? In a world that is dangerously changing, what do Quakers who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, gender non-binary, and queer bring to the table?
What fresh approaches and perspectives do LGBTQ+ Quakers have to offer the climate movement?
And what vital roles do drag performances and other art forms play as we communicate and build community?
We featured two queer Quakers concerned about climate change. That's a mouthful. I am Peterson Toscano.
And I am Miche McCall.
This is Season 3, Episode 6 of the Quakers Today podcast, a project of Friends Publishing Corporation.
And this season of Quakers Today is sponsored by the American Friends Service Committee. There are many ways to approach huge, multifaceted, and serious issues like climate change.
When people show up with their whole selves, they bring diverse experiences, insights, and perspectives vital for holistic, practical, and just responses to a crisis.
There's value in looking through multiple lenses of race, class, ability, nationality, and more. Peterson and I come to climate change as queer Quakers.
I am an older, cisgender, white, gay man who volunteers with the Red Cross and Citizens Climate Lobby. Since 2014, I have spoken out about climate-related issues through podcasts, short films, workshops, and performances.
And I'm a Gen Z white queer person who works at Quaker Earthcare Witness. I've spent the summer doing nonviolent direct action outside of Citibank, sometimes dressed as an orca or Chapel Roan, to demand that Wall Street stop financing fossil fuels.
I think it's fair to say, Miche, that we are both obsessed with and curious about climate change.
Definitely. And Peterson, we are not the only ones.
There's a few different identities that matter a lot to me. One of them is being a queer human and a genderqueer non-binary person. Gender being, a lot more complicated than just what was assigned to me at birth. Being born and raised Quaker is a big part of my identity and comes up quite a lot in work and professional settings. There are a lot of times when that calm, steady, listening presence that Quakerism really emphasizes helps a lot in the nonprofit world and helps me to be a good active listener in reaching consensus with groups of people.
That's Damon Motz-Storey. Damon uses they, them pronouns. Their queer Quaker approaches to climate change are grounded in justice, love, and play.
A queer Quaker response to climate change is a response that is realistic and grounded and knows that the world that we have been given is a deeply unfair one, and yet we can't control that. We cannot control what has happened. I think there's a sort of a radical acceptance over the fact that we are, in this moment, here together, and all we have are each other. And that's our greatest gift, our greatest strength. To me, the Quaker part of that response honors and uplifts every single person that understands that every person has something valuable and beautiful to contribute, not just to the world and to, just the way that we interact with each other, but also to the solution to climate change and the most terrifying parts of it. We each have one piece of the key, and together we can put that key together. And the queer part of it helps to ground myself in knowing that those solutions may come from unexpected places. Another huge part of it is just joy and exuberance, silliness, understanding that we can laugh in a very scary, harsh time, and that actually we should laugh, because that is how we actually are going to keep going. That powers us, that fuels us. It is our superpower to be able to be joyful and to insist upon pleasure, even in a world that is so insistent upon pushing us back into the closet or out of sight. And we can instead stand up and say, no, we're going to save the earth, and we're going to do it in 6-inch heels and full makeup. It's going to be fun, and we can do it.
Lina Blount is the Director of Strategy and Partnerships with the Earth Quaker Action Team, or EQUATE.
I am queer, polyamorous, have dated people all along the gender spectrum. I myself am a cis woman. I use she, her pronouns. I have a rebellion against just some of the labels in general. What is a queer Quaker response to climate change? For me, it's deeply about interconnectedness, listening deeply to that of God in ourselves and being deeply curious about that of God in others, trusting others to be on their own path of discernment. I need everyone around me to be safe, to thrive and be myself, to create actions that transform these companies and these systems that are destroying the planet. It's a loving, life-giving, creative process that fundamentally is about profound love. A sense of mutuality and reciprocity that is so beyond transaction. It just doesn't resemble transactional relationships, extractive relationships, quote unquote, like traditional relationships.
Both Lina and Damon told us how their identities as queer Quakers shape their responses to climate change. Let's break down some of the themes that emerged from their answers.
One of the most striking themes from both Lina and Damon is the emphasis on interconnectedness and the value of community. Lina talks about how climate justice work is deeply rooted in recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings and ecosystems.
Queer folks have helped me think of interconnection and relationship in those ways, like both reciprocity and responsibility. Our, liberation is bound up in each other's. And I think that's really powerful, especially in climate work, because it's how ecosystems work. Ecosystems don't work just locally. There's these incredible webs of interconnection. Ecosystems provide us so many models for the variety of connection that can be life-giving and generative. That metaphor feels really apt for queer community and chosen family for me. Yeah. Chosen family becomes this necessity when the family that you maybe were born into isn't accepting, isn't affirming. And so chosen family is about finding affirmation, finding folks who can see and love you for all that you are. Deeper and broader interconnection is definitely something I feel like I've learned through queer community and feels really important in how I approach climate justice organizing.
Damon explains how being genderqueer and non-binary has shaped their understanding of complexity within the climate movement.
Being non-binary myself and understanding that gender is a lot more complicated than an either-or predisposes me to understand that there's all kinds of things in the climate world that are not just one thing. Let's look at buses, public infrastructure, public transit, more buses. We've had this around for so long, it doesn't seem like it would be an incredible climate solution, but it absolutely is. We already have the technology to get people where they need to go to work and to school and to doctor's appointments without contributing to the climate crisis, without polluting on a big major scale. If the bus is running well and reliably, it does all kinds of other amazing things for society. It is one of the fastest routes out of poverty if you're able to get to your job affordably and quickly.
Lina and Damon emphasize the creativity and love central to their climate work. For Lina, it's about a loving, life-giving process that drives her to transform harmful systems into ones that nurture life.
Trying to find solutions or alternatives to harmful systems is a deeply creative thing and requires trial and error and requires kind of sense of agency and co-responsibility for creation. So that's a thing that feels really related to how queer community approaches relationships, how queer elders have taught me about how they've been accountable to each other, the types of structures they've created.
Damon brings a sense of joy and playfulness into their response. they remind us that we can still find power and joy and exuberance in the face of terrifying realities.
Damon uses drag performance as a way to process big feelings about climate change and connect with people on a whole different level.
Desdemona Lisa, I like to say that she's a work of art and a piece of work. One of my first drag performances as Desdemona Lisa, I took a Ziploc gallon bag and I filled it with ice. I balanced it just so in between the dress I was wearing and kind of on top of the back of my hips so that I could have a performance moment where the ice literally calved off of my ass in order to symbolize the melting of the glaciers and the calving of polar ice caps. It got some big laughs out of the audience. It's not me making fun of women, right? That's very important for me to clarify if folks are not familiar with drag. I can't stop thinking about some of this stuff sometimes, and so there's ways in which making a drag performance out of some of my climate anxiety or big feelings about climate is a way to sort of like work through and process some of those emotions. And it's a way to actually talk about those feelings in a way that is perhaps a little bit different and a little bit more of an entry point for some folks.
Beyond joy and creativity, Lina and Damon recognize the importance of inclusivity and honoring diverse perspectives.
Climate change becomes an existential threat to some and an inconvenience to others. In Oregon, roughly 40% of all homeless youth identify as LGBTQ. We should not be surprised as to the reasons why. There you have a huge demographic of folks that have very few options to shelter when there's extreme weather, when there's a heat wave, when there's an ice storm. These can be life or death moments for people living outside and on the streets.
Lina trusts others to be on their own path of discernment, believing that everyone has a role in creating actions that transform the world.
But yeah, I mean, my Quaker faith calls me to sit and grapple with what is mine to do, what does Spirit call me to do, what of God in me needs to be of service in the world. I think it transforms how we act together.
Together, Lina and Damon paint a picture of a queer Quaker response to climate change that is grounded in love, creativity, community, and joy. It's a response that challenges us to embrace interconnectedness, find strength in our relationships, and transform the world with our unique gifts that each person brings.
And as we've heard, it's a response that's as much about committed action as it is about celebrating who we are, full makeup and all.
Absolutely, Peterson. This blend of deep love, radical acceptance, and joyful defiance is what makes their queer Quaker responses to climate change so powerful and so necessary.
This has been a very, very rich question for me to consider. It's a query I've actually considered for the past 10 years. What is a queer response to climate change? Going into a crisis like climate change with a query can be really useful in getting deeper understanding and discernment. And for me, being queer and being Quaker, these are two big parts of my identity, but I think it extends to all kinds of identities. If you're Catholic, if you're a person with a particular disability, if you have a child that's on the spectrum, all of these different perspectives are essential to tease out and to explore and to investigate. How does climate change interact with those? And what do we bring that's specific to help in pursuing solutions?
That's great. We must recognize, though, that this is the beginning of a much larger conversation with more diverse voices. Here are some resources for you.
Yeah, a few years back, I produced an episode for Citizens Climate Radio. It's called What Are LGBTQ Plus Responses to Climate Change? In it, I feature two Americans, the queer researcher, Leo Goldsmith, along with Isaias Hernandez, who is better known as Queer Brown Vegan. And I also spoke with the queer South African economist Nokwanda Maseko. They discuss the unique challenges and contributions of LGBTQ plus people in the face of climate change.
The UCLA School of Law's Williams Institute published the report Climate Change Risk for LGBT People in the United States. It offers a detailed analysis of how climate change disproportionately affects the LGBTQ+ community.
And definitely check out Can't Stop Change, Queer Climate Stories from the Florida Frontlines. It's a documentary by Queers for Climate Justice. This film highlights the disparities faced by queer communities and the work being done to counteract them.
Find links to these resources and more at quakerstoday.org. You'll also find show notes and a full transcript. Before we wrap up today's episode, Peterson and I want to share a couple of books that tie into our discussion on queer Quaker responses to climate change.
I've been reading a powerful new collection called Deviant Hollers, Queering Appalachian Ecologies for a Sustainable Future. Zane McNeil and Rebecca Scott edited it. This book brings together essays from queer thinkers and activists who are exploring the environmental destruction in Appalachia through the lens of queer ecologies. It's not just about critiquing the exploitation of the land in the United States. It's about mapping out alternative futures that embrace critical queer perspectives.
Deviant Hollers connects with what we've been discussing today, how marginalized voices, particularly queer voices, can offer new possibilities for a sustainable future. I want to tell you about Smarter Planet or Wiser Earth by Gray Cox. It is published by the Quaker Institute for the Future.
Wait, there's a Quaker Institute for the Future? Oh my gosh, yes. That's amazing.
Yeah, they publish a lot of books, and it's kind of part of our thinking about this podcast of making sure that Quakers are thinking about and adapting to new technologies.
It's awesome.
This book couldn't be more relevant. Cox tackles the complex relationship between technology, particularly artificial intelligence, and the need for a more just and sustainable global community. He argues that while smart technology is often used to maximize profit and power, we should instead aim for a wiser approach, one that incorporates ethical considerations, collaborative dialogue, and diverse perspectives.
Yeah, that definitely resonates with the Quaker testimonies of community and stewardship.
Absolutely. And Cox makes a compelling case for moving away from monological reasoning. This is when one perspective dominates. Instead, Cox advocates for the rainbow rule. Do unto others as they would have you do unto them. It's about understanding and incorporating the needs and perspectives of others. This ties back to what we've been thinking about in terms of inclusivity and interconnectedness in the queer Quaker response to climate change.
Both of these books remind us that the solutions to our global crises, whether climate change or environmental degradation, need to come from a place of inclusivity, creativity, and a deep commitment to justice.
And they both offer valuable insights into how we can move forward. We have links to these books and more in our show notes at quakerstoday.org.
So thank you for joining us for this different episode of Quakers Today. Quakers Today is written and produced by me, Peterson Toscano.
And me, Miche McCall. Music on today's show comes from Epidemic Sound.
We wanted to take this moment to give a big thank you to the American Friends Service Committee. They have been our sponsors for Season 3 of Quakers Today. Oh, and Season 2. Thank you so much.
Do you want to challenge unjust systems and promote lasting peace? The American Friends Service Committee, or AFSC, works with communities worldwide to drive social change. Their website features meaningful steps you can take to make a difference.
Through their Friends Liaison program, you can connect your meeting or church with AFSC and their justice campaigns. Find out how you can become part of AFSC's global community of changemakers. Visit afsc.org. That's afsc.org.
Visit quakerstoday.org to see our show notes and a full transcript of this episode. And if you stick around after the closing, you'll hear listeners' responses to the questions, what are Quaker and queer Quaker responses to climate change? Plus, we have an important update about season 4.
Thank you, friend. We look forward to spending more time with you soon.
In a moment, you will hear listeners' voicemails answering the following questions. What is a Quaker response to climate change? And what is a queer Quaker response to climate change?
But first, we want to tell you what's going on with Season 4. This is our last episode in Season 3, and we've got the green light to go ahead and begin producing Season 4. That will come out in November. Before then, you'll get some shorter episodes. This is audio from previous interviews that did not air and some new content. It's just to keep you occupied as we prepare for the next season. Thank you so much for listening to Quakers Today. And now we'll tell you about our next question of the month, which will not be fully answered until November.
What novel, film, or television series changed your relationship with the world? A few years ago, I read Freshwater by Quaker Miche. Freshwater tells the story of Ada, a person with multiple spirits and gods living within them. The book opened my eyes to the complexity of identity, how we are more than just one story, or even oneself. Miche's exploration of gender, spirituality, and trauma was a powerful reminder that we contain multitudes. The world of fiction can alter the way we see ourselves, each other, the natural world, the political order, history, and society. What work of fiction shifted your perspective or altered your worldview? You can answer that question by leaving a voicemail with your name and the town where you live. The number to call is 317-Quakers. That's 317-782-5377. 317-Quakers. +1 if calling from outside the USA. You can also respond to this question on one of our social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, and X. I have these contact details in our show notes over at quakerstoday.org. Now we'll hear the answers to the questions, what is a Quaker response to climate change? And what is a queer Quaker response to climate change? Our first response was on TikTok from Rhiannon Grant, who was on our episode Quakers and Welcome. She said, "For me, it's important to see how responding to the climate crisis is also a part of my other Quaker commitments. Love for all, peace building, justice, etc., and not separate." Another TikTok response from Yarrow is, "As a Quaker, my response to climate change is to be more ethically responsible. I took up dumpster diving in order to keep stuff from the landfill, and I can also share with others who need them. I also try to be less wasteful and try to upcycle as much as possible."
Many thanks to everyone who left answers to the question of the month and for the great engagement that we're seeing on our social media. It's such a pleasure interacting with our listeners. Thank you so much, and we will see you soon.